We put up this chart showing, back then on our early analysis that there was no relationship between lockdown stringency and mortality. As more of the longer dated lockdown countries fill in, that line is going to start tipping against lockdown. We are almost certainly going to end up showing that lockdowns actually cause higher coronavirus mortality. And the reason for that is linked to this concept that your endpoint, whether you like it or not, is herd immunity, okay? And what you want to be doing, what your strategy ought to be oriented around doing, is getting to herd immunity whilst infecting the smallest possible number of vulnerable people. And you do that by changing the relative mobility of vulnerable people. You bring down their mobility without reducing the mobility of the non-vulnerable people. And what general lockdowns do is exactly the opposite, because your vulnerable people are less mobile to start with. So when you start putting the brakes on the kids and the young adults and so on, you massively reduce their mobility. And so the relative mobility of the older and more vulnerable people, the at-risk people, actually goes up. And that, for me, is a very compelling explanation for why you get this very high mortality in countries like Peru, who have had brutal and extended lockdowns, and the very high age-based mortality that we've experienced in South Africa with our 220-odd day lockdown. It's actually counterproductive.
And you know what? This was published in the British Medical Journal back in June, July, this concept by a team, peer-reviewed, and we have the paper, and Friedrich also has a paper out now, preprint, same concept. Makes absolute sense, even though it's a little counterintuitive, and it agrees with the real-world data and predictions, unlike Imperial College junk. So here we have it, that they will actually serve to maximize COVID-19 deaths over the long term, and add on an enormously bigger number of excess deaths by all the other lockdown impacts. And they destroy society, destroy freedoms, ruin the economy, cause massive child poverty and starvation over time in other areas of the world, yada, yada, yada. So the science says that this is the most catastrophic own goal in human history in public health interventions. And the irony is the West chose to drop all of what we knew and copy China. Isn't that the irony as the initial spark for this madness?
Yeah, the biggest lockdown fanatics, not just with respect to coronavirus, but with respect to Uyghurs and with respect to Hong Kongers, they show it all the time. That's what they do for fun. They lock down, you don't copy people like that.
Ever.